The concert hall was alive with excitement. People filled every seat, chatting and laughing, waiting for the annual music competition to begin. It was one of those evenings when the air itself felt charged, heavy with the sound of tuning instruments and the rustle of programs. The lights above shimmered on polished wood and brass fixtures, reflecting the nervous energy of everyone there. Among the contestants, one man stood out, not only because of his sharp black suit and slicked back hair, but because he carried himself like someone who already knew he would win. He was a pianist with a reputation for skill and arrogance. His performances were famous around the city, not just for their speed and technique, but for the way he owned the stage. Every movement of his hands was dramatic, every bow exaggerated. He thrived on applause and compliments, and he made sure everyone knew it. To him, music wasn't just about art, it was about dominance. He liked being the best, and he liked making sure everyone else knew he was the best. As he walked past the other participants backstage, he greeted them with quick, shallow smiles. He didn't mean any of them. He didn't see competitors, he saw background characters. Then his eyes caught someone sitting quietly in the corner, away from the noise and chatter. It was a woman, calm and still, her hands resting in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress and looked completely at ease, almost like she didn't belong in this competitive world. He frowned slightly. He had never seen her before. She looked too modest, too quiet to be part of this event. Maybe she was someone's family member or a guest. But then he noticed her contestant badge pinned neatly to her dress. His curiosity turned into amusement. He let out a small laugh to himself and muttered, "This should be interesting." The event began with small performances, young students, amateurs, and a few skilled local musicians. The proud pianist didn't bother paying much attention. He was only waiting for his turn to play, to show everyone why he was considered the highlight of the night. But as he leaned against a pillar, sipping water and checking the program list, he heard a faint sound nearby. Someone was softly humming, just a gentle tune, but it was beautiful, so pure that it made him turn his head. The quiet woman was standing near the grand piano, eyes closed, as if lost in a memory. Her fingers brushed the edge of the keys, not pressing them, just feeling the instrument. Her hum blended perfectly with the soft sound of the air conditioning and the faint buzz of the crowd. For a second, even he had to admit it sounded peaceful. Then he smirked. "Practicing without playing? Maybe she's saving her energy," he said loud enough for a few nearby people to hear. Some of them chuckled, not wanting to upset him. The woman opened her eyes and looked at him. She didn't seem offended. In fact, she smiled gently as if she understood something he didn't. "You'll need more than humming to impress the judges," he added, adjusting his cufflinks. She didn't answer. She only said softly, "Sometimes music isn't about impressing." Her calm tone threw him off. No one ever talked to him like that. He was used to people either flattering him or avoiding him. Her quiet confidence felt strange, like a mirror reflecting his arrogance back at him. He decided he would put her in her place soon enough. When it was finally his turn, he walked onto the stage with the confidence of a star. The crowd applauded before he even touched the piano. He gave a small nod, enjoying the attention. Then he sat, flexed his fingers, and began to play. His performance was thunderous. The notes came fast, precise, powerful. His hands moved like lightning, his body swaying with every chord. The audience loved it. He could feel their admiration with every cheer. He added extra flourishes at the end, holding the final note just a little longer than necessary, milking every drop of applause. When he stood up and bowed, the hall echoed with clapping. He flashed a confident smile and walked off stage, feeling invincible. As he passed the quiet woman waiting for her turn, he stopped. His pride got the better of him. "Want to warm up with a little challenge?" he asked with a playful grin. "We could give the audience a bonus performance." A few people nearby heard him and started whispering excitedly. The idea of a sudden duet or a challenge intrigued them. The woman looked at him, unsure at first, then nodded slowly. "If you like," she said simply. He was surprised she agreed. He expected her to back down. The event host, seeing the tension, thought it might be fun and gave them a few minutes on stage before the next scheduled performance. The crowd cheered again, eager for something unexpected. The pianist sat first. "Ladies first," he said mockingly, then laughed and started playing anyway. He went for speed again, his fingers racing across the keys in complicated patterns. He used every trick he knew, Fast arpeggios, heavy chords, sudden pauses that made the audience gasp. When he finished, the room exploded with applause. He turned to her with a smug grin. "Your turn." She walked slowly toward the piano. The applause faded. The lights dimmed slightly. She took a deep breath before sitting down. Her posture was calm, her hands steady. For a few moments, she didn't play. She just rested her fingertips above the keys. The silence stretched long enough for people to start shifting in their seats. Then she began. The first notes were soft, almost too quiet. But they carried emotion that filled the entire hall. There was no rush, no showmanship, only feeling. Her melody was simple, yet each note sounded as if it had something to say. People leaned forward without realizing it. Even the proud pianist standing off stage felt something strange in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Her music painted a story, though no one could say exactly what kind. Some in the audience felt sadness, others felt peace. It was like she was speaking a language only hearts could understand. There were moments of silence between her notes that somehow said more than all his thunderous chords combined. When she stopped playing, there was no immediate applause. The room was too full of emotion. Then someone started clapping slowly, and within seconds the whole audience stood. The sound was deafening. People wiped tears from their eyes. Even the host looked speechless. The pianist didn't know what to do. He had played perfectly, but somehow it didn't matter. What she played wasn't perfect in a technical sense. There were a few missed notes here and there. But it was real. It came from somewhere deep. His applause felt forced. For the first time, he realized that maybe perfection wasn't everything. Backstage, he couldn't stop thinking about her music. He wanted to know what had made her play like that. When he finally saw her again, she was sitting quietly just like before, hands folded on her lap. She looked peaceful, as if nothing had happened. He started but couldn't find the right words. He wanted to say beautiful, but it felt too simple. She smiled gently. "Thank you," she said. "You play very well too." He laughed softly. "Well, not as well as you, apparently." She shook her head. "Music isn't a race. It's a story. Everyone tells theirs differently." Her words stayed with him long after the event ended. He watched her leave the hall quietly, unnoticed by most of the crowd, just as she had arrived. For someone so humble, she had managed to make everyone remember her. And though the judges still gave him a high score, he couldn't shake the feeling that she had won something much greater, something he didn't even understand yet. That night, when he sat at home in front of his own piano, he played again, but this time his fingers felt heavier, slower. For the first time, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just listening, to the silence between the notes, to the feelings he had ignored for so long. And without realizing it, he began to understand what the quiet woman had meant when she said that music isn't about impressing. It was about connection. The next morning, the proud pianist woke up earlier than usual. He couldn't get the sound of that quiet woman's music out of his head. Even as he brewed his morning coffee, he could still hear her melody playing somewhere in his memory. It wasn't loud or showy like his own style. It was calm and full of meaning. Every note seemed to carry a feeling he couldn't explain. It bothered him in a way he didn't expect. For the first time in years, he felt unsure about his own music. He sat down at his grand piano, the one he was so proud of. Sunlight fell across the keys, but he didn't touch them right away. He stared at his reflection on the glossy surface and wondered what she had meant when she said music wasn't about impressing people. He had always believed that applause was proof of success. But when she played, there had been a kind of silence afterward. An emotional silence that said more than any applause ever could. He tried to play something new, but every chord sounded empty. His fingers moved fast, but the notes felt lifeless. He stopped and sat quietly, his hands resting on the keys. The room felt too big and too quiet. For the first time, he realized that speed and perfection didn't make people feel anything. Maybe that was why her simple, emotional playing had reached everyone so deeply. Later that afternoon, he received an invitation from the event organizers. They wanted him to perform again the following week at a charity concert. It was a good opportunity. Famous guests, reporters, and sponsors would be there. Normally, he would have been thrilled. But now something felt different. He accepted the invitation, though his excitement wasn't the same. Instead of thinking about applause, he was thinking about that quiet woman and her words. Over the next few days, he tried to find out more about her. He asked around among other musicians, but no one seemed to know her well. Some said she used to perform years ago but suddenly stopped. Others said she taught children piano at a small community center. Nobody had any real details, only bits and pieces. The mystery made him even more curious. On the day of the charity concert, he arrived early. The hall was smaller than the competition venue but still elegant. Volunteers moved around, setting up chairs and tuning instruments. Among them, he spotted a familiar figure sitting at a piano in the corner. It was her. She was helping one of the younger performers, guiding the child's hands gently on the keys. He watched from a distance. Her patience, her kindness, it felt genuine, unhurried, real. The child smiled up at her as she clapped softly in encouragement. The sight made him smile too, though he didn't quite understand why. When their eyes met, she recognized him right away. She gave a polite nod, then turned back to the child. He hesitated for a moment, then walked over. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said with an awkward smile. She looked up. "They asked me to help with the younger players," she replied. "I like being around music even if I'm not performing." "You should be performing," he said before he could stop himself. "You're amazing." She smiled lightly but didn't respond. Instead, she said, "Sometimes it's not about being on stage. Sometimes it's about helping others find their sound." Her calmness disarmed him again. He wasn't used to people who didn't seek attention. The way she spoke made him feel like she saw something beyond the surface of things. He wanted to ask her more about her past, her music, why she played the way she did. But the child interrupted, asking her about a note. She turned to help, and he took that as a cue to step back. When the concert began that evening, the atmosphere was warm and friendly. Unlike the competition, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about sharing. Families, students, and professionals all performed. Some were nervous, some confident, but everyone seemed to play from the heart. When it was his turn, he walked to the stage with less pride and more thoughtfulness. He didn't bow dramatically this time. He simply sat and began to play. He chose a piece that was slower, gentler, something that reminded him of her music. He didn't try to impress anyone. He just played what he felt, and for the first time in a long while, it felt honest. The crowd listened quietly, really listening. When he finished, there was a moment of stillness before people began to clap. He smiled. Not the usual proud smile, but a small, genuine one. After the show, several people came up to praise his performance. They said it was different, softer, more emotional. He thanked them politely, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He wanted to talk to the quiet woman again, but she had already left. He found himself wondering where she went, what kind of life she led outside these events. A few days later, he decided to visit the community center someone had mentioned. It was a small building tucked between two shops on a quiet street. Inside, he could hear faint piano music, children practicing. He followed the sound and found her sitting at an upright piano with a small group of kids gathered around. She looked happy, more alive than he had ever seen her on stage. She was teaching them simple songs, encouraging them when they made mistakes. He waited until the lesson ended before approaching. She looked surprised to see him but didn't seem upset. "You found us," she said softly. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Your music, it changed something in me." She tilted her head slightly. "Music changes everyone if you let it," he smiled. "Maybe I never really let it before." They talked for a while. He learned that she used to be a concert pianist years ago. Her husband had been a composer, and they used to perform together. But after he passed away suddenly, she stopped playing in public. She said the piano reminded her too much of him. For a long time, she couldn't even touch the keys. Teaching children had helped her heal, slowly, quietly. When she spoke about her husband, her eyes grew distant but gentle, not sad. He listened without interrupting. He felt small compared to her story. All his pride, his trophies, his fame, they suddenly felt meaningless. What she had lived through and still managed to share with others was something he couldn't measure. "Do you ever plan to perform again?" he asked softly. She looked at the piano and said, "I don't know. Maybe one day. Maybe when the music feels like a friend again." He nodded, understanding more than he expected to. "If you ever do, I'd like to be there." She smiled. "Then maybe you will." He left the center that day feeling lighter but also more thoughtful. Her story stayed with him, her calm voice echoing in his mind. Over the next few weeks, he began to change. He practiced not to show off but to express. He listened more to other musicians, to people, to silence. His music began to sound different. It wasn't louder or faster, but more real. When he played now, he thought about how each note might make someone feel. He stopped performing for approval and started playing for meaning. People noticed. His audience grew not because of his confidence, but because of his sincerity. Critics said his music had matured, but he knew it wasn't maturity, it was humility. One afternoon, he received an envelope at his studio. Inside was a small handwritten note. Charity recital next month. Would you play a duet with me? It was signed with her name. For a moment, he just stared at it. Then he smiled. She was ready to play again. As he sat at his piano that evening, he thought back to that first night when he had mocked her, thinking she was just a quiet amateur. Now he felt grateful that she had shown him what real music was. The world saw him as a proud pianist. But now when he played, he felt something deeper, something human. The melody that filled his home that night wasn't fast or loud. It was gentle, full of warmth and gratitude. And somewhere inside that music, he could almost hear her voice again, calm and steady, reminding him that music isn't about being the best. It's about sharing what's inside your heart. The day of the small charity recital arrived, and the pianist felt a strange mixture of nerves and excitement. He wasn't just playing for himself anymore. He was going to share the stage with someone who had changed the way he understood music. The hall was modest, not nearly as grand as the competition venue, but it had an intimacy that made every sound feel close, almost personal. Volunteers moved quietly around, arranging chairs and setting up the piano, but the energy in the air was different from a competitive event. There was no tension, no one trying to outshine anyone else. It felt like a space made purely for music. He arrived early as usual and found her already at the piano, her back straight, her hands resting lightly on the keys. She looked calm, peaceful even, and yet there was a quiet intensity about her. She didn't notice him at first, lost in her own preparation. He watched from a distance, remembering the first time he had seen her play, and how completely she had captured the room without effort. He couldn't help but feel nervous. For once, he wasn't sure he could match what she would bring to the performance. Finally, she turned and looked at him. Her eyes held a kind of warmth, but also a challenge. She smiled gently. "Are you ready?" she asked. He nodded, even though his stomach felt tight. He had played countless concerts, but nothing had ever made him feel quite like this. It wasn't about pride or reputation. It was about meeting someone who understood music in a way he never had. He realized that what had made him confident before, his skill, his speed, his flair, wasn't enough anymore. This was different. The audience began to arrive. Families, local musicians, and supporters of the charity filled the seats. There were no reporters, no cameras, only people who genuinely cared about the music. The pianist took a deep breath and walked onto the stage, followed by her. The moment they sat at the piano together, the room seemed to settle into silence. Even the hum of the air conditioning faded, as if the hall itself was listening. They had agreed beforehand to play a duet, but they hadn't discussed every detail. They would follow the music and each other, allowing the performance to evolve naturally. He glanced at her once more, noticing how her fingers rested lightly above the keys, her posture calm, her breathing even. He realized she wasn't nervous at all. Her confidence wasn't the kind that demanded attention. It was the kind that invited trust. He pressed the first key and she responded instantly. The melody began slowly, each note chosen carefully, each chord given space to breathe. He followed her lead, listening, adjusting, letting the music flow through them instead of trying to control it. It was a strange feeling for him. To play not to impress, but to connect. Every note became a conversation between them, a shared story unfolding in real time. As the piece progressed, the hall seemed to disappear. There was no audience, no applause waiting at the end, no competition. There was only the sound of the piano and the emotion it carried. He felt her presence beside him, the subtle guidance in her timing, the way she let certain notes linger, the way she responded to his improvisations with gentle precision. For the first time, he understood what she had meant about music not being about impressing others. It was about connection, about feeling something beyond words. The audience listened quietly, enraptured by the music. Some had tears in their eyes. Others sat frozen, unable to move, as if caught in the current of the melody. The pianist could hear the subtle shifts in their breathing, the soft gasp here and there, the barely audible sighs. Every note they played together seemed to touch something deep inside each listener. It was a different kind of power, one that didn't rely on skill alone but on sincerity. He glanced at her briefly during a quiet passage. She was completely absorbed, her eyes half closed, her face serene. He noticed the way her fingers hovered just above the keys before pressing them, how every movement seemed deliberate yet effortless. He realized she had transformed the music into something alive. It wasn't just notes anymore. It was emotion made tangible. He began to feel something unexpected, a deep respect not just for her talent but for her humanity. He had always thought the best musicians were the ones with the fastest fingers and the loudest applause, but she showed him a different truth. Music was more than technique. It was about heart, about presence, about letting the sound speak when words could not. He felt a pang of regret for all the times he had played to show off, not to share. The piece reached its crescendo, and he followed her lead, allowing the dynamics to rise naturally. He stopped trying to dominate the melody, letting her guide him through the emotional peaks and valleys. The sound of the piano filled the room, rich and warm, each note layered with feeling. He felt a strange sense of humility, something unfamiliar yet comforting. He realized that in this moment, he was not performing for the audience or for himself. He was performing for the music itself, and for the woman beside him who had reminded him of what it meant to play from the heart. As the final notes faded into silence, the audience erupted into applause, but it felt secondary to what had just happened. The music lingered in the room, in the air, in the hearts of everyone present. He turned to her, expecting perhaps a small nod or a smile, but found her eyes glistening with emotion. She was quiet, as always, but the intensity of her gaze spoke volumes. She had shared a part of herself that words could never convey, and he felt honored to have been part of it. Backstage, he couldn't find the words to express what he felt. He had performed countless times, but never like this. He had never felt music in such a raw, intimate way. He realized that all the shows he had done before, all the applause and praise had been hollow compared to the experience he had just shared. He wanted to thank her, to express the gratitude and awe he felt, but words seemed inadequate. Later that evening, as they walked out of the hall together, she spoke softly. "Music finds its way when you let it. You were ready to hear it today." He nodded, still processing the experience. "You taught me something I didn't know I needed," he said. "I've been playing for the wrong reasons." She smiled gently, the same calm, knowing smile she always wore. "It's never too late to start listening," she said. "Music is patient. It waits for you." As he left the hall that night, he felt changed. Something inside him had shifted, not in skill or fame, but in perspective. He understood now that being a musician wasn't about proving anything to others. It was about being true to the music, about letting it speak through you, and about connecting with those who listen. Over the next few weeks, he found himself practicing differently. He slowed down, paid attention to the spaces between the notes, and thought about the stories behind the music. Every time he played, he thought of her guidance, of the quiet strength she carried, and the way she had shared her soul without saying much at all. His playing began to change, subtly but profoundly. It was less about speed, less about flair, and more about feeling. One afternoon, he received a small handwritten note. It simply read, "Would you like to play together again at the community recital next month? I think it's time to share this music more." He held the note in his hands, reading it over and over, a smile spreading across his face. She wanted to play with him again, and he knew this time it wouldn't be about competition or pride. It would be about music itself and about the journey they were taking together. He set the note down and sat at his piano. He pressed a key, then another, letting the sound fill the room. It was a soft, tentative melody at first, but it carried a warmth he hadn't felt before. He thought of her, of the way she had touched the piano in the hearts of everyone who heard her. And for the first time in years, he played not for anyone's applause, not for validation, but simply because the music needed to be heard, and because he finally understood how to listen. That night, as he finished his practice, he looked at the piano and smiled. He felt a sense of peace he had never known, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing that music was more than a performance. It was a connection, a story, and a gift. And he knew that the quiet woman who had challenged him had given him more than a lesson in music. She had given him a glimpse of what it meant to play from the heart. Weeks passed since the charity recital, and the pianist couldn't stop thinking about the quiet woman and her music. Her melody, gentle yet powerful, had lodged itself in his mind, and he kept replaying it over and over, trying to understand why it affected him so deeply. He had always believed that speed, precision, and showmanship were the key to being a great musician. Now he realized that there was something far more important, something he had been missing for years. He began visiting the community center more frequently, watching her teach children to play the piano. Each lesson revealed more about her approach to music and to life. She was patient, attentive, and kind, guiding the children not just to hit the right notes but to feel them. When a child struggled with a passage, she didn't scold or correct harshly. She demonstrated gently, explaining how the music should feel, encouraging the child to find their own rhythm and expression. He watched fascinated, realizing that her music wasn't just about performance, it was about nurturing, about sharing. He approached her one afternoon after a lesson had ended. "I want to understand more," he said. "Your way of playing? It's unlike anything I've ever heard. How do you do it?" She smiled softly. "I don't do it," she said. "It comes from listening. Listening to the music, to the silence, to life. Music is about more than skill. It's about emotion. It's about connection." He nodded, trying to absorb her words. "I've spent years trying to impress people," he admitted. "I never thought about connection, I just played for applause." She placed her hand briefly on his shoulder. "Then it's not too late to change," she said simply. That afternoon, she showed him a piece composed by her late husband. She explained the story behind it, how every note reflected a moment, a memory, a feeling they had shared. As she played, he listened intently, realizing that every pause, every delicate touch carried meaning. It wasn't about perfection. It was about telling a story, about expressing something that words could never capture. He felt a lump in his throat. This was music in its purest form, and he had been blind to it. The pianist began to practice differently. He no longer focused on speed or technical mastery alone. He listened, feeling each note, allowing the music to guide him. At first it was difficult. His fingers were trained to move quickly, to dazzle, and slowing down felt unnatural. But as he persisted, he noticed subtle changes. His playing became more expressive, more honest. People began to comment on the depth of feeling in his performances, but he didn't care about praise. He was learning to play for the music, not for recognition. One evening, she invited him to her home to see her personal piano. It was an old grand, slightly worn but full of character. She played a piece for him, soft and haunting, and he felt every note resonate in his chest. She shared memories of her husband, of concerts they had played together, of compositions they had written side by side. Listening to her, he understood the depth of her loss and the resilience it had taken for her to return to music, even in small ways. She had endured more than he could imagine, yet she had not let her grief silence her entirely. She had transformed it into something beautiful, something that could touch others. He realized that her quietness was not weakness but strength. It was a deliberate choice, a reflection of her humility and respect for music. Unlike him, she had never used her talent to boast or dominate. She played to share, to heal, to connect. The more he learned about her, the more he understood that his own arrogance had been a shield, a way to protect himself from vulnerability. Watching her, he saw a courage he had never possessed, the courage to be authentic, to let the music speak for itself. He wanted to ask her to perform together again. The thought of playing a duet with her both thrilled and terrified him. He wasn't worried about the audience. He was worried about measuring up to her sensitivity, her understanding of music. Could he truly follow her lead, set aside his pride, and let the music flow naturally? He knew it would be a test not of skill but of humility. She seemed to sense his hesitation. "Don't worry about being perfect," she said one afternoon when he voiced his doubts. "If you play from your heart, it will be enough. Music is never about perfection. It's about honesty." Her words echoed in his mind as he practiced. For the first time, he felt that music could be a conversation, a shared experience rather than a competition. He imagined them on stage together, the notes weaving between them like a story only they understood. The thought no longer intimidated him. It inspired him. He felt a connection not just to her, but to the music itself, as if he were discovering a language he had always known but never spoken. The day of their first practice together arrived. They met at the community center after hours, the hall empty except for the two of them and the grand piano. She sat first, her fingers hovering lightly above the keys. He sat beside her, adjusting his posture, taking a deep breath. They nodded to each other, a silent agreement that this would be a shared journey, not a display of talent. The first notes were tentative. He was cautious, listening closely to her timing, her dynamics, the way she let the melody breathe. At first he made small mistakes, his fingers stumbling over chords he normally played flawlessly. But she didn't criticize. She simply continued, guiding him gently, showing him how to respond to the music rather than force it. Slowly, he found his rhythm, learning to anticipate her phrasing, to feel the pauses, to embrace the spaces between notes. As they continued, something remarkable happened. The music began to flow effortlessly. The hall seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of their combined melody. He realized that this was what he had been missing all along, listening, adapting, trusting, and sharing. He felt a sense of freedom he had never known, as if the piano had become a voice for emotions he had kept hidden for years. By the end of the practice, both were exhausted, but exhilarated. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the final notes hang in the air. He felt a deep sense of gratitude toward her, not just for teaching him about music, but for teaching him about patience, humility, and authenticity. He had begun to see that being a true musician was not about mastery alone. It was about understanding, feeling, and connecting. She turned to him, her expression gentle. "You're ready," she said. "Not for the audience, not for applause, but for the music itself. That's all that matters." He nodded, feeling a sense of clarity he had never felt before. He realized that the lessons he had learned from her would shape not only his performances, but his entire approach to life. Music had become a mirror, reflecting the changes within him, revealing the pride he had abandoned and the humility he had embraced. In the following days, he continued practicing both alone and with her. Each session deepened his understanding. Each note he played carried more emotion and intention. The more he engaged with her music, the more he discovered his own voice. Not a voice of arrogance or showmanship, but a voice capable of expression, connection, and honesty. He knew that the upcoming recital would be more than a performance. It would be a testament to the transformation he had undergone, a celebration of music as a bridge between hearts. And he knew that he would never again play without listening, without feeling, without respect for the power of a single note. Through her, he had learned that music was not a tool for pride, but a vessel for the soul. As the day of the recital approached, the pianist felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness he had never experienced before. He had performed countless times, yet he now understood that this would be different. It wasn't about impressing anyone, winning applause, or demonstrating his skill. It was about sharing music in its purest form, and it would be his first true collaboration with someone who had changed the way he played, thought, and felt. He arrived at the venue early. The hall was familiar, small but elegant, and filled with an air of quiet excitement. Volunteers moved about, setting up chairs and checking instruments. The pianist noticed her already at the grand piano, adjusting the bench for the children who were to perform first. She looked calm, as always, serene yet purposeful. Watching her, he felt a surge of respect and admiration. She moved with quiet confidence, the kind that didn't seek attention but naturally commanded it. When she saw him, she smiled softly. "Are you ready?" she asked. He nodded, though his chest tightened slightly. He wasn't sure if he could meet her calm presence with the same grace and sensitivity she exuded effortlessly. Still, he knew he had to try. He had learned from her that music wasn't just about the notes, it was about heart, honesty, and connection. They began with a short practice session before the audience arrived. Her fingers hovered lightly above the keys, and he followed, listening carefully. Each note she played seemed deliberate, carrying meaning that transcended the sheet music. He noticed small details, the way she allowed certain notes to linger, the gentle pauses that seemed to create space for emotions, the subtle dynamics that made the music breathe. He tried to match her sensitivity, adjusting his timing, tone, and expression. It wasn't easy, but he felt the music guide him, not the other way around. Once the audience settled, the recital began. The first performers were children, shy and nervous, yet encouraged by her gentle coaching. The pianist watched quietly, realizing that this was another way she shared her gift, nurturing young talent, teaching them not just to play but to feel. He noticed how the children responded to her presence. They trusted her completely, not because she demanded respect, but because she gave it. He felt a pang of humility, seeing the way she quietly influenced lives without seeking recognition. Finally, it was their turn. The pianist and the quiet woman walked onto the stage together. The audience applauded politely, but there was no overwhelming cheer. It wasn't necessary. The anticipation in the room was palpable. They sat at the grand piano side by side, fingers poised above the keys. He glanced at her briefly, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She nodded, a silent reassurance that they would play together, not against each other. The first notes began softly, a gentle dialogue between them. At first he moved cautiously, listening to her phrasing, following her subtle cues. She didn't dominate. She invited him to respond, to contribute, to share the story. Slowly he allowed himself to relax, letting the music flow naturally between them. Each phrase became a conversation, each chord a shared emotion. For the first time he played without pride or ego, without thinking about impressing anyone. He simply played with honesty and openness. The audience was captivated. They listened in silence, caught by the beauty and depth of the music. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the subtle interplay between the two musicians. Every note carried meaning. Every pause allowed the emotion to resonate. The pianist felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known. He realized that all the accolades, applause, and recognition he had sought in the past paled in comparison to this experience. This was music in its purest form, alive and meaningful. As the piece progressed, he began to notice something profound. The quiet woman's playing wasn't just technically perfect, it was transformative. She seemed to infuse the music with life itself, each note a reflection of her soul. He felt her emotions flowing through the piano, and he allowed his own feelings to merge with hers. Together they created something larger than themselves, a harmony that transcended performance. It wasn't about being the best. It was about being true. He remembered the early days when he had mocked her at the competition, assuming she was timid and inexperienced. Now he understood the depth behind her quiet demeanor. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strength, patience, and humility. She had faced unimaginable loss, yet she still chose to share music with the world. He felt ashamed of his past arrogance, but grateful for the lesson she had taught him. As the final notes lingered in the hall, the room erupted in applause, not out of obligation, but out of genuine appreciation. He looked at her, seeing the same calm satisfaction she always carried, and realized that she had not only shared music with the audience, but had transformed him as well. He had learned to play with honesty, to listen, to feel, and to connect. She had shown him that music was not a competition, but a bridge between hearts. After the performance, they walked backstage together. He felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had experienced something rare, something transformative. He looked at her, wanting to express the depth of his gratitude, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you. You've changed the way I see music." She smiled gently, her eyes reflecting the quiet strength he had come to admire. "You were ready," she said. "Not for applause, not for recognition, but for the music itself. That's all that matters." He nodded, understanding fully for the first time. He realized that the lessons he had learned from her extended beyond the piano. They were lessons in humility, patience, and the courage to be authentic. He knew that he would never again play without listening, without feeling, without respect for the power of a single note. In the following weeks, the pianist continued to practice and perform, but everything had changed. He no longer sought to dominate the stage or impress the audience. Instead, he played with intention, with emotion, and with honesty. People noticed the change in his performances. Critics commented on the depth and sensitivity of his playing. Audiences felt a genuine connection to the music, something he had never experienced before. Yet he didn't care about the praise. He had discovered a new purpose, to let the music speak, to share emotion, and to touch hearts. He continued to visit the community center, watching the quiet woman teach and learning from her approach. She had shown him that music could heal, inspire, and connect. She had taught him that the true measure of a musician was not in speed or technical skill, but in the ability to convey feeling, to listen, and to share. Her influence had transformed him, not just as a pianist, but as a person. One day, He received a note from her inviting him to play a special duet at a small local event, dedicated to her late husband's memory. He felt a mixture of nervousness and honor. This was not a performance for fame or recognition. It was an opportunity to honor someone's life and to share music in its most heartfelt form. He accepted immediately, eager to collaborate with her once more. As he prepared for the duet, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the first mocking words at the competition to the quiet lessons in humility and connection, he had learned more than he could have imagined. He had learned that music was not about pride or ego, but about listening, feeling, and sharing. And he knew that playing alongside her would be a continuation of that journey, a chance to create something beautiful, sincere, and unforgettable. That evening, as he sat at his piano alone, he allowed himself to feel gratitude. He had been challenged, humbled, and inspired by someone whose quiet strength and authenticity had forever changed him. The music he played now was different, full of emotion, full of meaning, and full of life. And as he pressed the final key, he smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one in which music would no longer be a competition, but a bridge between souls. The day of the final recital arrived, and the pianist felt a mixture of calm and anticipation he had never experienced before. This performance was not about showing off, winning, or receiving praise. It was about music in its purest form, about connection, and about sharing a story through sound. He arrived at the hall early, the familiar air of anticipation around him now different. It was gentle, welcoming, and full of possibility. The quiet woman was already at the piano, her hands lightly resting on the keys, eyes closed for a brief moment. She looked peaceful as always, yet there was a quiet intensity in her presence. She seemed to radiate confidence that wasn't loud or demanding, but firm and grounded. Watching her, the pianist felt gratitude and respect deep in his chest. She had guided him, challenged him, and shown him what music could truly be. He realized that without her influence, he might never have discovered the depth and meaning in his own playing. When she opened her eyes and saw him, she offered a gentle nod and a small smile. It was enough to reassure him. They both knew that tonight was not about competition, but about collaboration. They were here to create something together that would live beyond applause, something that would linger in the hearts of those who heard it. Before the audience arrived, they ran through their pieces once, testing dynamics, timing, and flow. The first few notes were tentative, as always, but as they continued, their music began to breathe, to flow naturally between them. Every pause, every subtle change in volume, every delicate touch on the keys was a conversation. He realized that their combined playing had become more than a duet. It was a dialogue of emotion and understanding, a story told through sound. Finally, the audience began to fill the hall. Families, music lovers, and local supporters settled into their seats. There was no nervous energy, only an eager quiet, as if everyone in the room knew they were about to witness something intimate and sincere. When the pianist and the quiet woman walked onto the stage, the applause was polite but warm, not overwhelming. They acknowledged it briefly, then sat together at the piano, ready to share their story. The first notes flowed gently, a soft conversation between their hands. He followed her lead, responding intuitively, no longer trying to dominate or impress. She guided subtly, allowing the music to shape itself naturally. Slowly, the hall seemed to disappear. There were no distractions, no competition, no external pressures, only the piano and the story they were telling together. Each chord, each phrase, each pause carried emotion. It wasn't about technical mastery or speed. It was about sincerity, depth, and connection. As they played, he noticed the subtle shifts in her phrasing, the way she allowed the melody to linger in the spaces between notes. He felt her emotion flowing through the music and mirrored it, letting his own feelings pour into the performance. It was a delicate balance, a dance of listening and responding, and he realized that this was what true musical collaboration meant. It was no longer about ego or recognition. It was about creating something alive, something that would touch hearts and stay with listeners long after the final note. The audience sat in silence, captivated. Some had tears in their eyes, others sat frozen, caught in the depth of the music. The pianist could feel their attention not as judgment but as presence, an intimate witnessing of something beautiful. It was a reminder that music at its best was a bridge between souls, and he was no longer performing alone. He had learned to listen, to feel, to connect. Midway through the performance, they reached a passage that required both of them to play delicate, interwoven melodies. He had practiced it countless times, but never had it felt so alive. He let go of control and allowed the music to lead him. Her subtle guidance was like a gentle current carrying him forward. Each note felt alive, each pause pregnant with meaning. He realized that he had been blind for years, thinking that speed and technical skill were the ultimate measure of a musician. Now he understood that music's true power lay in emotion, authenticity, and connection. The final section of the piece approached. It was quiet, reflective, and demanded full emotional commitment. He focused intently, listening to her phrasing, responding to the spaces she created, allowing the melody to ebb and flow naturally. He felt a strange exhilaration and humility at the same time. They were creating something larger than themselves, a shared expression that was not about individual skill but about unity, presence, and honesty. As the last notes faded, there was a profound silence. It was not awkward or empty, but full, heavy with emotion and meaning. The audience slowly erupted into applause, but he barely noticed. His attention was entirely on the quiet woman beside him, the one who had changed the way he saw music, who had taught him to play from the heart, to listen and to share. She looked at him, her expression calm but deeply satisfied. He felt a lump in his throat, realizing how much he had grown, how far he had come from the proud, arrogant pianist he once was. He wanted to say something profound, to express all the gratitude and respect he felt, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he simply nodded and she returned the gesture, a quiet understanding passing between them. Backstage, they packed up their things and walked quietly out of the hall. The night air was cool, carrying the faint echoes of applause and music. He felt a sense of peace he had never known, a satisfaction that went beyond success or recognition. He had learned lessons that would stay with him forever: humility, patience, empathy, and the courage to be authentic. The experience had changed him not only as a musician but as a person. Over the next few days, he continued practicing, not to impress, but to express. Each note he played carried a piece of what he had learned, and he found joy in exploring music in ways he had never considered before. He visited the community center frequently, watching her teach, learning from her patience and grace, and feeling inspired to apply those lessons to his own life and performances. He also began mentoring younger musicians, sharing not just technical skills, but the importance of listening, feeling, and connecting. He encouraged them to play honestly, to embrace vulnerability, and to find their own voice rather than chasing applause or competition. He realized that this was part of the legacy of the quiet woman who had taught him so much. Music was not about self, but about others, about community, and about sharing what was within one's heart. Months later, they were invited to perform together at another local event. He no longer felt nervous in the old way. Instead, he felt excitement and gratitude. He knew that together they could create something meaningful, something that went beyond notes on a page. When they sat at the piano and began to play, the audience once again fell silent, captivated by the emotion and sincerity of their performance. As the final note echoed through the hall, he realized that his journey with her had come full circle. From the first mocking glance at the competition to this moment of shared musical expression, he had learned lessons that no trophies, applause, or fame could ever provide. He had learned to listen, to feel, and to play with honesty and heart. He had learned that true music was not a show of skill, but a bridge to connect souls, to share stories, and to touch hearts. Walking home that evening, he felt a quiet joy and fulfillment. He had been challenged, humbled, and inspired by someone whose calm presence and deep understanding of music had forever changed him. And as he walked under the night sky, he thought of the quiet woman, the piano, and the journey they had shared, knowing that this was only the beginning of a life filled with meaningful music, shared with sincerity and heart.